Hello, let's learn about how to formulate an antibiotic. Antibiotic policy has been made mandatory in Indian healthcare settings as per NABL standards. The NABL Chapter 5 on hospital inpatient control mentions that the organization has effective antimicrobial management program through regularly updated antibiotic policy based on local data and monitors its implementation. Program also includes monitoring of antimicrobial usage in the organization. We explain the hospital or the healthcare setting should have antibiotic policy formulated through a common consensus of all the stakeholders and based on local antibiogram of that healthcare setting, and it should be its compliance should be monitored for implementation, and it's also needs to be the program also needs to monitor the consumption of antimicrobials of the healthcare setting. We will see in the next slide how to do this. So antibiotic policy aim is to have right drug for the right bug. To select patients who needs to be treated to have all the antibiotics available and avoid unnecessary antibiotic usage. What is the base of this antibiotic policy? The spectrum of the antibiotic activity, the pharmacodynamics, the adverse effects, the potential to select resistance, the cost, and the special needs of individual patient groups. The key elements of antibiotic policy includes prophylactic therapy or empirical therapy, multidisciplinary group, adapting from the pre-existing guidelines. Policy should be based on systemic review of antibiogram. The recommended antibiotics should be effective against pathogens of that locality. The recommended dosage, route, and duration must be mentioned. Identify the evidence that is lacking, and auditing of the processes, and policies should be revised by experts, not a part of the developing group. So we need to consider the overview of the antimicrobial sensitivity of experimental antibiotic policy. For example, clindamycin is active against anaerobes, metronidazole against anaerobes. Then we have cefepime is active against most gram-negative bacilli, as well as it has activity against gram-positive cocci, while ertapenem has activity against gram-positive cocci and gram-negative, but no activity against anaerobe. Similarly, clindamycin against has activity against MRSA, MSSA, and streptococci. And vancomycin, ticagrelor, and daptomycin has activity against gram-positive cocci, but doesn't have any activity in gram-negative bacilli. To know your local antibiogram, to use the antimicrobial sensitivity patterns data of the from the microbiology lab of the hospital and develop an antibiogram, that is a cumulative antibiogram. The document of CLSI M39A4 document should be used and followed to analyze and present the cumulative antimicrobial data of the healthcare setting. What are the recommendations of this document? To analyze the antibiogram at least annually, include only the final results. At least more than 30 isolates are required to prepare the antibiogram. Environmental reports or of isolates should be excluded. Eliminate the duplicates. Only the first report should be considered, and only those drugs which is routinely tested and reported should be used to formulate the antibiogram, and only susceptible data should be considered. The data can be entered into the WhoNet software, which is a free data port software that is available to which can generate antibiogram. We also have automated softwares with automated machines like Phoenix and Vitek, like Epicenter and Myra software, wherein we get a real-time antibiograms. Now, what is a cumulative antibiogram? Its principles is to avoid potentially misleading data. Is the statistical significance of the susceptible isolates. 30 isolates should be included for the study, including only the first isolate I said before. Compare the local and national antibiogram. Compare and report antibiogram and trend annually. How to do this formulate the antibiogram? Step 1 is compare all the antimicrobial susceptible data of that healthcare setting. ICUs, from wards, from surgical site infection and others. Have a percentage distribution of the drugs, of the bugs. For example, as you can see from this picture, the organism spectrum, Stenotropons, Pneumococci, Candida, Pseudomonas, Acinetobacter, E. coli, capital, have a percentage distribution of the drugs, have a percentage distribution of the susceptibility of the antibiotics against the organisms. Then put according to the site of the infection and the type of the infection, put the data in the template that I will be sharing here. Put the causative pathogens, preferably 6 to 12 months data is required. Capture the pathogens according to contributing to 80 to 90% of the infections. And capture the susceptibility from highest to lowest for each category, for each syndromes like pneumonia, intra-abdominal infections, UTI, BSI, that is bursting infections, surgical skin and soft tissue infections, surgical. So this is the template of the list the most common first 5 most common pathogens and their prevalence, and list the 5 most sensitive antibiotics and the prevalence of sensitivity. And have this validity. Let this template have a validity. Like from the slide, Jan to June will be the validity of this antibiogram, and again make a new antibiogram for the next period. So identify the most common sensitive antibiotics. Have list them into table like most common pathogens, the prevalence, the most common sensitive antibiotics against these pathogens for particular sample like bloodstream or exudates or urine or respiratory samples. The cutoff value for an antibiotic to be chosen as an empirical therapy is about 80%. It can differ as per the hospital policy, and similarly, antibiotics, as said before, can be used for various clinical samples for various ward for various clinical departments. So this is how the sample of an antibiogram. You can have antibiogram population wise, that pediatric adult wise, or sample wise, or patient comorbidity wise, and setting wise. Also needs to be borne in mind that some organisms are intrinsically resistant, like protease intrinsically resistant against colistin tetracycline, enterococcus against cephalosporins, and others. The patient satisfaction antibiogram patient needs to be satisfied according to contact with the healthcare system, whether it is present or absent, antibiotic treatment were given or not, and patient characteristics like young or. So patient can be characterized as to patient type 1, 2, 3, and 4. That is no contact with healthcare system. The patient type 2 is contact. Type 3 is hospitalization more than 5 days. Type 4 is hospitalization plus additional risk factors. And accordingly, we have susceptibility to infections like bacterial infections or fungal infections and high risk of invasive fungal infections. So empirical antibiotic the antibiotic policy should include empirical antibiotic policy, prophylactic policy. While framing the empirical antibiotic policy, things need to be considered such as patient is the patient infectious, which organ is sick, which antibiotics should be used, and what dose. Are not here. Urgent antibiotic therapy will be warranted when the patient is in sepsis, and that too wherein the detection of the sepsis. Which organ is sick in that condition? Get appropriate cultures, gram stainings, do serological testings, molecular detection is available, and definitely maintain the culture and at least 2 sets of blood cultures for collection before antimicrobial treatment. We need to remember that bacteriological characteristics like pharmacodynamics during empirical therapy. To choose, it depends upon the tissue penetration, the resistance pattern, and the host factors. It again depends upon the category of the patients. For type 1, there is no role of antifungal. By type 2, where there is a ESBL prevalence, then and then beta-lactam inhibitors can be used. Then type 3, where there is more risk of carbapenem resistance. Accordingly, anti-pseudomonal beta-lactam inhibitors and carbapenem resistance sparing drugs should be used in this category of patients. Against type 4, where there are more chances of fungal infection, empirical therapy fungal infection for both stable and unstable patients as per ADC guidelines would be required. So we have a categorization of antibiotics as access, watch, and reserved or restricted group of antibiotics includes those antibiotics which need to be reserved only for serious cases, while watch group needs to be utilized very judiciously, while access group should be preferred for whenever indicated. So this is an example of how according to categories of the patients, we can have an antibiotic policy according to the syndrome. Like for bloodstream infections, the most common pathogens, list the most common sensitive antibiotics, and according to type of patients, type 1, 2, and 3, we can have the corresponding strategies of antimicrobial stewardship, such as empirical therapy to escalate or de-escalate or to stop the therapy. Now, prophylactic antibiotic needs to be administered for in surgery cases within 1 hour incision, because before 1 hour or post 1 hour, the prophylactic antibiotics would have no or little. You can refer to the treatment guidelines for antimicrobial usage as per the ICMR guidelines published in 2019. There are also WHO guidelines. Know when to say no to higher antibiotics and de-escalate and stop the orders as indicated. Efforts should be in place to move to switch the antibiotic patients from a IV antibiotic to oral antibiotic. Antibiotic care bundles includes the site of any infection, the risk stratification, the local microbiology data, the antibiogram, and de-escalation. All this combined to make evidence-based antibiotic. So how do you start? Creating guidelines involves prophylaxis, therapeutic guidelines, measuring the adherence, and measuring even the direct cost. So prophylactics this should be based on general evidence of its benefits from a common consensus, and for therapeutic there should be a steward of syndrome specific stewardship. So the most common is infection of the hospital fulfillment antibiotic policy like UTI, pneumonia, catheter infection, skin. Then look for the epidemiology of the last 6 months to 1 year, develop the guidelines including the mechanism of resistance, the stratification of the infections, do a consensus with the clinical stakeholders, listen to the doubts, ask about difficult, negotiate. Once the consensus is generated, is agreed, it should be implemented, followed with the clinical stakeholders. Appropriateness is critical. The components of appropriate, adequate, and optimal antibiotic therapy needs to be considered while framing the. Thank you.